Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm KM Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello and welcome. You are listening to Secrets of Story Structure Part 1, 5 Reasons Story Structure is Important. What's the single most overlooked, misunderstood, and yet important part of storytelling? Since you've already heard this episode's title, you already know the answer is story structure. 12 years ago, I shared the series, Secrets of Story Structure, on my website. And that series became the basis of one of my best-known writing craft books, Structuring Your Novel. That original series and the book that followed were founded upon my journey as a writer, particularly the burning need to know how story worked. What is story, anyway? And which principles and patterns could show me how to write stories that hung together, created seamless arcs, and most importantly, resonated with readers. Like most young authors, I was eventually told the answer to all these questions was structure. When I began exploring what that meant, I had no idea how monumental a journey I had just embarked on. I expected story structure to teach me how to write great stories. What I didn't foresee was that it would also change my entire perspective of life itself. My basic question, what is story anyway, had a much bigger answer than I anticipated. And this is because, of course, story is life itself. Story is a reflection of the cyclical patterns and psychological arcs we experience throughout our lives. When we examine these structural patterns that create resonant stories, what we find are the landmarks of life itself. When we structure a story, we're trying to create a faithful facsimile of real life. This is what grounds a story's verisimilitude, whether it's hyper-realistic modern fiction or the most fantastical and archetypal of fairy tales. The foundation of solid story structure allows audiences to suspend disbelief and identify with the story world, even if that world is filled with bizarre and unfamiliar details. Writers often discuss story structure as if it were something we arbitrarily impose upon a story, when really just the opposite is true. What we call story structure is the shape of life itself. As writers, it is our job to uncover this shape from within our story ideas and polish it until it touches a point of universal resonance within every member of our audience, no matter how different they may be from us or from each other. Although the simplicity of certain plot beats by themselves are not enough to achieve this crystalline resonance, they are the first step. Writers initially come to story structure for many reasons. Sometimes it is with the explicit purpose of creating that crystalline resonance. More often, it is because we're trying to write something entertaining, realize we have no idea how to do it, and want guidance. Whatever the case, story structure offers writers a roadmap to writing solid plots. It lays the groundwork for compelling character arcs and themes. It taps into the resonance of the collective consciousness, and it even deepens our understanding of life. Now, although the foundational principles I shared in the original version of this series remain the same, I have learned so much about both stories and life in the past 12 years. I felt it was time to revisit the incredible importance of this information, to polish its rough spots, to add some new information, and to correct a few areas where I have refined my perspectives. I was inspired to revisit this series, and for those who prefer the book experience, to create a revised and expanded second edition of Structuring Your Novel. I've also just released a sequel to that book, Next Level Plot Structure, which goes even deeper into principles of story theory, chiastic structure, and the deeper meaning and purpose of important structural beats. So I hope you will enjoy joining me over the next few months as we update this important series and take a deep look into the secrets of story structure. My wish is that you will be able to use this fundamental knowledge to write easier, better, and deeper stories. Most uninitiated writers have two different reactions to the idea of story structure. Either they think it's great, but too mystical and lofty to be understood by common mortals, or they think it's formulaic hooey that will sap the art right out of their books. I started somewhere in between, in the camp that didn't even realize there was such a thing as structure. From there, I progressed to reading complicated outlines that left me shaking my head. If that was structure, then it seemed my story would practically be written for me before I even came up with a decent idea. Thanks, but no thanks. What I didn't know is that even as I subjected the idea of story structure to my ignorance and ridicule, I was already structuring my stories without even realizing it. In the following years, I was introduced to many theories of structure representing the inevitable components found in good stories, whether their authors deliberately structured them or were just lucky enough to wing it on their own good instincts. The macro level of story structure that I present in this series is a happy medium of the two. 10 plot beats that, when arranged correctly, give both authors and readers the biggest bang for their book. Foundational story structure creates nothing more than the arc of a story. It does not tell the writer what events must happen at certain beats, only what those beats need to represent to create a functional arc. Although specific beat sheets can sometimes be helpful, especially when dealing with genre formulae, this overspecification can distract from the beautiful simplicity of what story structure really is. And what is it? Number one, story structure creates a foundation for the plot that mirrors the arc of psychological transformation. It ensures the story contains all the pieces required to make sense while eliminating the temptation to create redundancy. Number two, story structure creates pacing. Standard plot beats divide the story into 8, ideally equal parts. Although structural timing will be stressed throughout this series, what is most important to understand is that it exists to create pacing, which in turn exists to control the audience's experience of the story, to keep them engaged and invested in every moment. So, over the next 11 weeks, we will be exploring beat by beat the most important moments in story structure. These are the first act, which spans the first quarter of the story from the 1% mark to the 25% mark, and contains the hook, which begins the story at the 1% mark. This opening moment is your opening scene, the first thing that happens in your story, possibly even the first line. Number two, the inciting event taking place around the 12% mark. This is a turning point that occurs halfway through the first act. This is the call to adventure, the moment the normal world is first significantly rocked by the conflict. Number three, the first plot point taking place at the 25% mark. And this is the doorway between the end of the first act and the beginning of the second. The second act spans from 25% to 75% in the story, and it contains the first pinch point happening around the 37% mark. This is a reminder of the antagonist's power, which provides new clues about the nature of the conflict. And then we have the midpoint or second plot point, which occurs at the 50% mark. And this contains a moment of truth when the protagonist realizes the central truth about the nature of the conflict. And then we have the second pinch point, taking place around the 62% mark, which foreshadows the third plot point and serves to remind the protagonist what is at stake. The third act spans from 75% to the end of the story. It begins with the third plot point at the 75% mark. This is a dark moment for the character. After the victory at the end of the second act, he experiences a reversal. This will lead to the climax beginning halfway through the third act, around the 88% mark. This is a turning point that forces the protagonist and the antagonist to finally face one another, leading to the climactic moment around the 98 or 99% mark. And this is the moment the protagonist's goal is met and it becomes a physical impossibility for the conflict to continue. And ending with the resolution, which eases the readers out of the excitement of the climax and into the final emotion. Over the next few months, we will explore the mysteries, fallacies, and opportunities of story structure. For today, though, let's consider a few reasons every author should care about structure and why none of us should fear it. Reason number 1, structure is required in all of art. Dancing, painting, singing, you name it. All art forms require structure, and storytelling is no different. To bring a story to its full potential, authors must understand the form's limitations and how to arrange its many parts into the proper order to achieve maximum effect. Reason number 2, structure does not limit creativity. Authors sometimes fear story structure will inhibit their creativity. If your book follows a specific road and observes certain pit stops, won't the story be written for you? But this is not the case. Structure presents only a shape, the curve of the story arc. It allows us to be concrete and confident in creating that arc, ensuring its effectiveness. Reason number 3, structure is not formulaic. Another fear is that if every story has the same structure, won't every story ultimately be the same? But this isn't any truer than is the idea that because every ballet incorporates the same movements, every ballet must be the same. Structure is only the box that holds the gift. What that gift may be varies as wildly as the wrapping paper that hides it. Reason number 4, structure offers a checklist of must-have elements. Don't we read how-to books or listen to podcasts like this one because we want to discover and remember all the elements that make up a successful story? Structure is nothing more than a list of those elements organized in one tidy package. And reason number 5, structure solidifies mastery of the craft. Learning to consciously understand the techniques that you're probably already instinctively using will broaden your understanding and tighten your mastery of the craft. When I first discovered the intricacies of structure, I was amazed to realize I was already incorporating most of the elements in my stories. Learning about these elements allows you to strengthen your raw creative instinct into purposeful knowledge. So, are you ready to open up a whole new world of storytelling? Structure is exciting, comforting, and liberating all at once. Whether you're discovering the ins and outs of story structure for the first time or just brushing up with me once again, I hope you'll enjoy our journey into the most salient and crucial moments in the creation of a story. So stay tuned. Next week, we will begin with the hook. And in the meantime, I hope you'll stop by and talk to me about this. How do you feel about the idea of story structure? And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, Keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of helping writers become authors.